So the talk has been co-written together or co-drafted together with the analyst team at King's Digital Lab. So myself, Paul, Sam, and Neil. But indeed today here is only me and Neil, Paul, that are doing a duet to present the talk. So the idea is to to talk about the research software analyst role. So I'll say a little bit about the wider landscape of digital research technical professionals and how the analyst fits into that. And then we will talk more specifically about King's Digital Lab. So apologies for those that already heard what we are and what we do, but we do need to give a bit of context. I'll talk about the analyst role. We will go through especially the two phases of the software development lifecycle, where the analysts in our team as the core responsibility distributed across so feasibility assessment and evolutionary development. We will use some examples to showcase what an analyst does in our team to kind of, to kind of showcase, yes, what we do and hopefully make you, the audience here, think that you might need something similar, whether within the roles you already have or as a new role. There'll be some references, obviously, and then we will close with some reflection on skills mapping with existing framework. How does our definition of this role map to things that already exist? So first of all, in the definition, you've heard this, I think, over and over again during the conference, this term of digital research technical professional, which is kind of embraced by UKRI in particular. And the analyst as a label, whatever that means, is mentioned in the categories of this research technical professional set of roles. So, for example, the Arts and Humanities Research Council definition, which at KDL we kind of complemented with some additional roles, included already the analyst label in there. So just to say, we are part of that umbrella. And within the Arts and Humanities discipline as a whole, there has been, over the last maybe 7 years, more awareness of the role of digital research technical professionals. And in some of the documents and reports that have come out of that, if you like, community involvement, there is a recognition that research software engineers do also analysis, right? Whether we mean business analysis or research analysis. So if you like, even if not as a specific role, the actual actions related to the analyst role are remit of what RSCs might end up doing. And this is an example of one of the, if you like, key community effort, the IDA report by Sikani et al. In 2023 that mentioned, as I said, research and business analysis, one of the things that RSCs might do. So this might be relevant for those of you that don't necessarily recognize as analysts, but have analysis in what they do. So what are we at King's Digital Lab? What do we do? KDL, or King's Digital Lab, is an embedded RSC, a research software engineering team of 13 people, permanent in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at King's College London. 4 of these 13 people are RSCs or have RSCs in their roles, others have other roles. Our mission is to enable and deliver high-quality digital research by contributing RSC expertise to grant-funded projects mainly. So provide expert, creative, critical approaches to design and use of digital technologies for research, mainly in the arts and humanities, cultural heritage, and a bit of social sciences. With an eye, obviously, to inform these approaches with robust RSC processes, an eye to quality and sustainability. We have a research services catalog that define additional activities that we do ad hoc, for example, ad hoc training, workshops, peer review, consultations of different kinds outside, if you like, of that grant-funded cycle. So what are the things we do? Planning, analysis, creating and sustaining digital resources, a bit of community engagement like what we're doing today. Even if the team is not particularly large, at least not for the STEM disciplines, for our disciplines, it is relatively well-resourced. And we run, or we work on around 100 projects in different phases of development, active, post-project, early concepts. So that gives you an idea of the scale. And we also, in the recent years, try to define umbrella research teams beyond specific projects so that we can keep also, if you like, our RSC-driven agenda a little bit more on focus. And you can find out more on our website if you're interested. So going back to, I think earlier on, Marion mentioned the timeline of RAC. So where do we fit in there? Our funding director already started in 2018 to adopt or to encourage the team to adopt the RAC term. And we could, I think, with confidence say that it was one of the first teams in the arts and humanities to do so, also internationally. And in 2019, we published a roles document, which is a reference of most of the talk today, which is on Zenodo if you want to check it out. But the idea of this document was always to be a dynamic thing, not necessarily a frozen description, but something that the team could use to professionalize roles and to grow, to recognize the different responsibilities. And in the same year, we also started with a bit of funding to make our templates and guidance available in an SDLC wiki, as we call it, with templates for projects and other sort of material that builds very much on Agile DSDM, even if over the years, again, we kind of contextualize it to the specific context we work in. But so what does the analyst actually do? What is their role, workload, and level? So I'll leave it to Paul to talk a bit more about this part of the talk.
Please don't break your necks trying to read that long document there. That's just an illustration of the document that Arianna was referring to there, the roles document. We'll be talking about this in sort of a more visible way almost immediately, in fact. But the analyst role, this is a nominal breakdown of the workload. It never comes out exactly like this, but this is a rough estimation of how we break it down. Those two first ones on the left, the 30% and the 20%, you could sort of draw a line between those and the other 30% to 20%, so that the two on the left are really all about project-facing work, and the two on the right are not. And as I'm going to talk in more detail about the project-facing work, the research analysis and the project management, I'll say a bit more here about those two on the right, the other responsibilities and more. So we do some research that is not necessarily for a specific project. And a lot of this is lab-facing, and it's looking into, for example, new tools, new ways of doing things that will improve our workflows or our processes in the lab. And we all do this. The designers do it, the developers do it, and the analysts do it. And then we sort of ping each other and say, hey, this looks like a good thing. We should try this. We should implement this. So that's one thing that we do. The teaching, 10% teaching, is kind of there in reserve. As Arianna mentioned, we actually don't do a lot of teaching. It kind of comes to us on an ad hoc basis, but we're always willing to do something to help the faculty. If we can't do regular academic teaching because we're not on academic contracts, but for example, Arianna and I worked with a faculty colleague to help teach a continuing professional development course on product management, and that was very actually rewarding for us as well as helping the faculty. And then that last one is a really interesting one. I don't know how many other groups have this, but we build into our role descriptions 10% time for personal research. And the idea is that if you follow kind of your own personal interests, usually they will lead back to having some connection with the lab and have some benefit for the lab, but not necessarily. And that's part of the beauty of it. You can just sometimes go down a research rabbit hole that's really interesting to you. Turns out it never gets back to the lab, but I consider it personal development anyway. So that in the end becomes a good thing. And that 20% of the and more, that really describes more outward facing, particularly faculty facing work. So we'll do things, we'll work for the faculty. They may ask us to prepare a little report or a presentation on something, or say a notebook with figures that they can use in Ref, something like that. Or we work with the faculty. For example, we'll sit on faculty committees representing King's Digital Lab, or if you like, representing the digital outlook on something. The analyst role, Arianna mentioned that we, several years ago, we made a concerted effort to formalize role descriptions for various types of research technical professionals. And we did this for the analysts as well. Obviously, we drew on personal experience because we'd been acting as analysts anyway. So we said, well, what we do is part of the analyst role. We can build on that. But we also looked out to external sources, documents that talked about, what business analysts do. And we anchored it, as it says there, with the skills framework for the information age, just to kind of have a standard reference skill set that we could associate with the role. And so what we did then, using all these sources, is we sort of laterally built out a set of activities and responsibilities and skills that were proper to the analyst role, any analyst, the basis of being an analyst, if you like. And then we vertically augmented those and said what would need to be added to them, what would need to be further developed in order to give a career progression through sort of junior analyst, senior analyst, and principal. So this next section is going to talk about what we do in the phase of our software development lifecycle that's been circled in red there. This is the pre-project phase. In other words, it's everything from between when we first get contacted by a prospective project partner to the point where, if we have gone on to work with this person, to the point where they're going to submit a funding application. And we usually refer to this phase either as pre-project phase or as the feasibility phase, because what comes out of this is, for us, a very important document, the feasibility assessment of how this project is going to work. And essentially, what an analyst does, the main thing that an analyst does in this phase is we talk to the project partner and we find out from them, first of all, what is it that they're trying to achieve? What is their goal? Nobody comes up with a project idea unless they've got a goal that they want to achieve. So we ask them, what is it they want to achieve? And once we know what their goal is, then we can start to formulate a plan to achieve that goal. And for us, of course, that plan is in terms of a technical solution that will allow them to achieve the goal. And once we've got an idea of a technical solution, then that brings with it, naturally emerging from the plan, are the requirements in order to be able to implement the plan successfully. So we'll work on those. Anybody who saw my talk will see how we list them out in the product quote. And then once we've got the set of requirements, then what we need to do is look at each requirement and estimate how long is this going to take to implement. And within that overall time of how long a requirement will take to implement, how long should we allot to each role in the solution development team? So how many days does the developer need? How many days should an analyst nominally allot to this? How many days for a designer? And so this is an example of the output of that process. This is from a project that's ongoing at the moment. On the left there, you'll see default requirements. We have a set of default requirements because we realize that essentially the same requirements come up whenever you do a project. They don't all come up, but from the set, some of them will definitely come up. And you can see them prioritized there using our Moscow system. M for must, S for should, C for could. Data protection, for example, is obviously a must and is always present, but training is a could, because sometimes project partner will want us to train, say, a PDRA in something, and quite often there's no training involved. And then in the middle, those are the project-specific requirements. This happens to be an epigraphy project, and so one of the things that they were interested in was the nature of the stone that the inscriptions are carved in. So we have petrographic environment as a requirement there. And then that third column is, as I mentioned, the estimates of the effort to be put into it and broken down by role. And then in the end, You tot up the time allocations for the specific project requirements, you add those to the default requirements. If we're going to be hosting a digital output for some length of time, then we add in an infrastructure cost, multiply that by our daily rate or whatever rate is applicable in this project. We have different rates for different contexts, and we end up with a cost. I'd really love for you to be able to see that picture there, because it's actually a masterpiece of a diagram, but unfortunately it's illegible. But that's an example of where we work out what the kind of overall workflow is going to be for the project. And it's an example of the sort of thing that we will produce if we can during the pre-project phase, because it sets us up well for doing the work later if the project gets funded. And this is then the second phase where the analyst does a lot of work. This is during the development phase itself. And here, the sort of the left-hand column there is essentially saying that what the analyst does most is organize and run things in a project management sense. So, for example, the analyst is responsible for meetings. As an analyst, I will be setting up internal meetings in the solution development team. I'll set up meetings with the project partners. I'll prepare the meetings, the agendas. I'll run the meetings. I'll record the results of the meetings. I will make sure that appropriate tasks are created relevant to the requirements. I will be the principal communication point, the liaison between the solution development team and the project partners. Generally, it's better if communications go through one person, otherwise they tend to splinter off in all directions. Another thing there in that middle column is that part of the job is to monitor what's happening in the project and to look ahead, so that you look at, you look at work that's being done on a requirement or set of requirements and say, where are we? And where are we in relation to where we thought we should be? And if we see that there are problems coming down the line, then the analyst can, for example, talk to the project partners about perhaps reprioritizing some requirements, taking them down from a should to a could, so that if necessary, they can be abandoned if we run out of time or money. That's quite an important part of the analyst role. And then towards the end of the project, when things are wrapping up, we can help them with, for example, depositing data in a research data management system. We'll help the lab manager to draft a service level agreement, which is relation to the hosting. And we will set up and help run the final project review, looking back on what went well and what sometimes didn't go well.
Thanks, Paul. So going back to the example of the same project that we mentioned earlier with the collaboration with Oxford and funded by the European Research Council, this is a relatively well-resourced project, so running over 3 years. And what are the kind of things that as an analyst, in this case, I was the analyst, I'm the analyst in the project, so what are the kind of things that we produce in the active phase? So we discussed it into 4 different blocks, even if you cannot see the image, it's not so important, but it was to exemplify the kind of artifacts that come out of those phases. So first, we have the analysis with the research domain experts. So in this case, I met with the photographer who was going through the material sciences processes to analyze their data, and recorded the discussions or a summary of the discussion, looked at the data samples, work together a common language for the project. That's very important. And some of this discussion also produce more or less ephemeral artifacts. For example, that diagram that you see there, it's an attempt to identify the units of analysis to start with, and then discuss those with the RSEs. So some of this is done in collaboration, some of this is led by the analyst with the researcher only. So then obviously the analysis with the RSE becomes more and more formalized. So the second diagram that you see, again, you don't see very well, but it's moving towards implementation, so it's more formal. And again, my job was to record some of the decision there in the discussion and record some of the artifacts when are relevant. Sometimes they're just obviously ditched. And then the one you see at the top there is the agreed process. Again, it's just a screenshot. By now, actually, that's evolved already, but is an example of the how the process became more defined via several iterations with clear interventions. So the stars represent where the RSC's intervention is the workflow that data processing occurred. And then last but not least, there is an example of a screenshot from the project review record. Paul mentioned that earlier. So it's a template we use, quite simple, but to record discussions, learning points, actions. So that's a screenshot of the moment of the iteration where that data processing, it reached a certain stage, or we had a certain visualization for the researchers to look at the data, analyze the type of stones, and identify whether something was a marble from Carrara or somewhere else. So these are an example of the kind of work that we would do. Same project, on the left, you have there, remember those project requirements that we had in the feasibility, so these come back, more or less refined, but we have a project management tool. At the moment, we're using ClickUp, so in that project management tool, those requirements, high-level requirements are described there, prioritized, and obviously as the project evolves, those tasks are enriched, they're broken down, made more granular, and so on, but the idea is that you can then check progress on these things. So the blue dots are the things that are in progress, the rest are open and not touched yet. And then on the right, you have, again, a kind of zoom into the project review record of the meeting, of few meetings in June. And the examples I highlighted was the situations where the RAC working in that project had too many competing priorities. And so we had to discuss together as a research team involving the partners and the RAC team, how to reprioritize that work. So that's something that the analyst does all the time. So I'm going to end with two slides that, as I mentioned earlier, kind of try to then map what we think are potentially characteristic skills, competencies that we think the analysts over the years in these roles, because actually these were also experiments, right? There are not many people that recognize the role as analysts in RAC teams. So how do these map to existing frameworks? So Paul mentioned that the SPHERE is used as a framework in the role definition we have. So those 7 characteristics that you have at the top, so communication across skill set and domains, analyst consensus building, prioritization, lab, RAC group capacity organization, funding, financial awareness, network building, facilitation, diplomacy, negotiation, lab, RAC group profile consolidation. Those are things that as analysts, we think are important for our roles. And obviously they map to the SPHERE stuff that was defined in our roles. But while doing this analysis, we also recognize there are at least 3 categories that aren't necessarily foregrounded in our document that are really important or are becoming more and more important. And these are the blue blobs that you see there. So service management, financial value and management, and relationships and engagements. And obviously, we're not saying that this is valid for all RSC groups, but it's definitely very important for us. And in discussion, it seems that it's very important for other RSC groups as well. And then I'm going to end with an attempt to also look at the direct framework draft. If you were yesterday took part in the workshop that discussed this, this is very much work in progress, but I thought it was useful to see how this categorization that we came up with as a reflection made by analysts map with this draft. And it's interesting because we could see a lot of interesting connections there, in particular around the professional skills, at the 3-level: personal, interpersonal, teamwork, and collaboration, leadership and management, project management, obviously, domain expertise and research, and communication. And this is mainly to say, again, the analyst role isn't necessarily just project management, although project management is a big part of it, but there's a lot of other skill sets that play important roles, hopefully also resonating with the talk that Marion gave earlier around collaboration and communication. And I'm going to end it there. Thanks a lot, and hopefully we can engage with questions and other comments.
Thank you both very much. Just get the Slido questions up. This sounds like a product owner, in Agile talk. How can you cost recover from grants when so much of this is done in a pre-project phase?
Sorry, you read the first one, right?
Yeah. It's two questions in one.
So in one of the slides, you probably did see that there were a mapping on other Agile terminology and roles. So definitely, product owner is some of the skills associated to product owner, especially in an industry setting, very much mapped with the analysis. In terms of recovering from grants, that's really spot on and interesting one, because obviously the costs that we recover are after the project starts, right? So that pre-project phase, we say it's gratis in the sense that our faculty paying our salary as permanent jobs is paying for that. So it's an investment, but we do track it and we do try to showcase the value of that work that is done to prepare for grants, bring that in more value later on that is also tangible, but it's not at the moment costed in grants.
Okay.
You want to add anything?
No, just on that second point, we believe that. I'm not sure that we have metrics we could point to prove it, but our gut feeling is that the more time we can spend, the more we can talk to the partner and refine requirements prior to the application going in, the better the application will be, the better the chance of success. And success of any kind, even if you're bringing in, say, AHRC funding, which is only 80% FTE, so it's always running at a slight loss. But in the environment, and this has been mentioned in previous talks, in the environment we have in higher education in the UK at the moment, showing success in bringing in grant funding is crucial. And it reflects well on the faculty, it reflects well on the college, and this is one of the reasons why faculty are willing to fund us in that, as Arianna described it, that gratis pre-project work.
Thank you. We've got time for one more relatively quick answer, I think. What sort of experience do the research analysts you recruit have? Is it a natural fit for RSEs looking for career progression?
Maybe again, I'll start and then Paul tell you more. One thing to say is that I wouldn't necessarily see as a career progression, but maybe a different career. So we have at least one example in our team of someone that had more of a, what you would call now an RSE. It was a developer role, and then decided that some of the skill set or some of his strengths were more in areas that were more akin to the analysis role. So I think that possibility of moving or identifying as you develop your profile, then maybe even if you are very technically savvy, you actually might want to develop other aspects of your skill set and competence. I think that's really good to have. So it was good to have those differences mapped out so that someone could move into a different career. There's something else you want to say? In contrast to the analyst who had previously had a more of a development role, we have another analyst who used to work in an archivist role. So we come from different backgrounds. Arianna comes from a sort of academic background, but with DH component to it. I come from having started doing a literature PhD, and then I got hooked into text encoding, and then I eventually ended up being an analyst. So there are many different routes, and there's no reason why an RSE would not become an analyst.
Thank you both very much. Let's give another round of applause to Arianna and Paul.